Shattering Myths. I am your host, Yahowah. We were considering the statement that Yahowah etched in stone regarding his overall encouragement to us that we should not be political or religious, that we should not swear oaths to, show homage to visual imagery. This is the statement where yesterday we recognized that the truncated, mistranslated Christian versions that are put on church walls and used to be in our courthouses, which just left the second statement as a commandment and said you should not or you shall not create a graven image, and therefore was speaking of carving. The actual aspect of carving an idol was wrong, and we focused on ashah, which is not the Hebrew word for carve. It's not the Hebrew word for make. It's not the Hebrew word for cast. It's not the Hebrew word for anything remotely associated with fashioning or creating something. Ashah is the Hebrew word for acting upon and engaging in. It's a matter of don't act upon, don't engage in anything associated with visual imagery. Now, that's not to say you can't have a picture of your favorite pet on the wall. That's not to say that you can't have a nice landscape picture. If you're not acting upon them, they're fine. If you're acting upon them, you're engaging in the process that they represent, there's where the problem is. If you are saluting a flag, that's a problem. If you are singing your allegiance to a nation or showing your allegiance to a nation and its symbols, that's a problem. If you are bowing down in a church with crosses, that's a problem. But if you're artistically inclined and out of clay or bronze or marble, you're crafting a sculpture, not for the purpose of showing any allegiance to it, but simply as a manner of this is a beautiful thing to look at, you're fine. So the religious corruption of this is what's invalid. It has nothing to do with carving something. It has nothing to do with painting something. It has nothing to do with taking pictures of something. It has all to do with acting upon these imageries, these religious or political objects of worship. You should not ever act upon or engage in, do anything which associates yourself with lo ashalah. And then pesel, these images, idols, religious icons, objects of worship or devotion, or any representation of something, a likeness and appearance, which is in the heavens above, or which is on the earth, or which is in the waters beneath the land. Therefore, a flag with stars on it is not a problem unless you act upon it. If you charge ahead and pledge your allegiance to that flag, then that's a problem. Then you're acting upon it. Now, as we move to the next interesting word, we find pesel, which was this object of worship, this religious or political icon. That can come in many forms, from the wine and bread of communion and the Eucharist, which are used as objects of worship, to the crosses and crucifixes, which are prominent to display in churches and cathedrals. A tamuna, which is a visual representation and likeness, is especially all-encompassing. It would include the pictures and busts on the walls and the images depicted in the stained glass windows of churches and political buildings. When you go to Washington and you see the large statues of Jefferson and of Lincoln and the shrines built around them, or the obelisk, which is a religious symbol from Egypt, to the sun and a Masonic symbol to George Washington. When you see those kinds of statuary and those kinds of monuments, then that's a tamuna. That's what God is saying. Do not act upon. And yet, so many people, and I was one of them, used to go to Washington, and I was deeply moved by the patriotic stirrings of these, magnificent appearing monuments. And that's what God's saying, don't do that. I don't want you to be political. I don't want you to be religious. I don't want you to be stirred by these images. If you look closely, especially in an Orthodox church, you notice how many references there are to the sun, the moon, and the stars, with circles around their crosses, halos above the heads of their saints, starbursts embellishing objects used in church rituals. Not only are the men and animals on display both carved and painted, the Christian God is depicted as a man. But that is not the end of it. The Pope wears a Dagon hat, symbolic of the fish god of old, and evangelicals often adorn their cars with an ichthus, which is also a fish from the waters beneath the land. I'd like you to think about something else, something I think is directly related to an object of worship, and that is the Christian caricature known as the Lord Jesus Christ, whereby God is not only modeled after pagan deities, this God was formed in the very image of man. His likeness is ubiquitous in places of worship and prostration, and he is most often adorned with a halo, which is symbolic of the sun. Yahowah, on occasion, 6 occasions thus far, has temporarily manifest some of his power, setting part of his power apart from himself, taking that spiritual energy and diminishing it to matter in the corporeal form of a man. He's done it 6 times briefly. It is not his nature. To focus, even if you were to have his name right, Yahusha, which means Yahweh saves, not Jesus. Even if you were to have his title right, Masayah, which means the work of Yah, not Christ, which means drugged. Even if you were to actually listen to his affirmations of the Torah, even if you were to understand and follow his being Torah observant, even if you were to do those things, by focusing on and drawing pictures of the man, you'd be missing the point. The diminished manifestation of Yahowah in corporeal form was only designed temporarily to manifest to us the word of Yahowah and to be the example of Yahowah saving us. We ought not focus on the diminished manifestation, but as Yahowah and Yahusha have both told us, instead on the Father. But we have turned the man into an object of worship, making God no bigger than the man. Moving on to the second of the 4 instructions in this, the second of 3 statements inscribed on the first of 2 tablets, we read, "You should never bow down and worship them or speak for them or to them." But yet Christians worship the man. They have worship services. They speak to the man. They speak for the man. And you should never serve them. Lo abad. So this is lo, chawa, la, wa, lo, abad. Chawa is one of the more interesting words in Hebrew. It has 2 meanings, a primary meaning and a secondary meaning. Its primary meaning is to attest to something, to make a declarative statement. For example, many times Yahweh will use chawa to CH is the hard CH sound, a W, and then the soft H sound. So 3 letters, the CH sound, the Hebrew wa sound, and the soft H sound. He will use this term speaking of individuals who will announce their position relative to his to who he is and to their acceptance of the covenant. And so it's a very positive term from that point of view. It's like so many Hebrew words that have a dark and light side. You're on one side or the other of them. Yareh is one of them, which means to respect and revere, but on the other side, to fear. Those who fear God do not respect and revere him. Those who respect and revere him do not fear him. But most people are on one side or the other of that divide, and you can't be both. Ana is another example. Ana means to respond, to answer, but it also means to afflict. And so, while the primary meaning is to respond and answer, the secondary meaning is to afflict. And so, those who respond and answer Yahowah's invitations to meet with him are not afflicted. But those who don't respond and answer his invitations, their souls are afflicted in the sense that they cease to exist. Also, from Yahowah's point of view, he afflicted his own souls so our souls would not be afflicted. He responded and answered by fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, afflicting his soul so that our souls would not be afflicted. Well, the same thing is true with this word Chawah, C-H-A-W-A-H. And it says that those of us who respond and answer God, who have come to know who he is, understand what he's offering, and have responded to him, have made a declarative statement that we accept the terms and conditions of the covenant, that we will never bow down in his presence. But those who have not responded to him this way, who have not declared their acceptance of the terms and conditions of the covenant, who have not answered the invitations to meet with God 7 times a year as part of the process of our reconciliation and our invitation into his home, they will bow down before him in judgment. So it's a very interesting word, and you have to be very careful as to how the context causes you to define it. Now, in this particular case, both of those connotations, the primary, which is to make a declarative statement, and the secondary, which is to bow down in worship, both apply. God doesn't want you doing either in a religious setting. This is a declaration against religion and politics. I am Yada. This is Shattering Myths. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. There are so many aspects of this statement that are interesting. You should never bow down and worship these religious or political symbols or speak for them or to them. Lo Yahowah law. You should never prostrate yourself in obeisance or homage to them or show any allegiance to them or promote their message, because doing so will influence you, and you should not serve them. Lo Abad. You should not be coerced into working or laboring in their cause as their ministers, nor should you ever be beguiled into submitting to them in servitude. Neither should you act upon them or engage with them. So 2 verbs here. One of the verbs speaks of either primarily of responding, speaking for, making a statement on behalf, which would include all of the popes and priests and evangelicals on behalf of religion, or the jihadists in the case of Islam, ministers on behalf of Christianity. He's saying, don't do that. Or even the political pontificators with all of their flags sitting behind them and the symbolism of government. He says, don't do that. Don't make protestations. Don't make statements that shows your allegiance to these things. You ought not be singing national anthems or stating the Pledge of Allegiance. No. You can do it. That's not going to say that you can't do it. I'm just going to say that if your interest is having a relationship with Yahowah, you can't do it. And God's pretty clear about this stuff. He says, yeah, I understand that only thousands of people amongst the billions who will pass through life will make the decision to forego their allegiance to government and politics and to choose me. But you're free to do so.
I would say the more important thing is that you won't want to. You won't want to.
That's correct. Yeah, once you come to know him and what he's offering and why he is opposed to our making promises and protestations on behalf of government and religion, and how opposed government and religion are to Yahowah, what Yahowah is offering, and how unreliable they are versus how reliable God is, that your motivation is to do exactly the opposite. So you're right. The whole nature of what God's offering through his covenant and in his Torah is liberating, in the sense that once you come to know who he is and what he's offering, it's not a question of you having to obey laws that say you can't do this, that, and the other thing. It's the things that he provides in terms of instruction, you're naturally inclined to want to do. So there's nothing on this, for example, that is limiting from the perspective of someone who's part of the covenant. Scott's completely correct. It is limiting on someone who's not part of the covenant. It says if you're going to choose, this is what you want to do. To be a flag-waving, flag-saluting, patriotic citizen of your country, engaged in making statements and making commitments on behalf of politics, acting on behalf of politics, acting on behalf of your religion, promoting your religion, speaking on behalf of your religion. He just says, if that's what you want to do, you can do it. It's just that you can't have a relationship with God. And if you have a relationship with God, it's not that you can't do these things, it's that you won't want to do them. But this Yahowah is such an interesting term because it also talks about being religious. What do religions cause people to do? What do you see Muslims do 5 times a day? Bow down, right? What do you see in Catholic churches? Those kneeling benches, because they're always bowing down. What does a cleric ask you to do before you state a prayer to God? Bow your head. So this is a realization that very few people grasp, that if you're bowing before God, then you're being judged by him. If you're bowing before God, you are not walking with him. If you're bowing before God, you're not coming through the door to his home. Those who stand with God, who walk with God, who participate and act upon the terms and conditions of his covenant, never bow in his presence. And the few times that someone that God is talking to about the relationship bows in his presence, if there's someone that God knows and is developing a relationship with, his first comment is, look up, get up. What are you doing down there? Don't do that. God does not want to be worshipped. If he wanted to be worshipped, that would demean him. It would say that he is insecure. Imagine creating a universe and life for the purpose of having that universe and life worship you. I mean, talk about how demented, how disgusting that deity would have to be. No, that's not what he wants. That's why he presents himself as the Father, and that's why he conceived a covenant. He wants a family. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. So after stating that we ought not surround ourselves with religious and political imagery, God says don't bow down and worship them, don't speak for them, don't prostrate yourself in their presence, don't show homage to them, don't show any allegiance to them, don't promote their message, because it's going to influence you, and you should not serve them. And yet, how many religious leaders claim that they're serving their God? A God who is depicted in drawings and paintings and in stained glass and in carvings in their religious institutions. The instruction was designed to clearly distinguish the kinds of images Yahowah considers inappropriate, as well as to affirm that it is our response to these political and religious symbols, not the act of making them, that is destructive to the relationship God is seeking to achieve. To engage in the covenant, we have to walk away from political, religious, societal allegiances. And while that might seem like you're giving up something when you're doing it, what you gain in terms of your relationship with God is so vastly superior, it isn't a constraint at all. And yet look how many people sing national anthems to their flag, pledging to serve what it represents, standing at attention, removing their hats, placing their hands over their hearts while others salute. We transform political symbols replete with stars into objects of worship. Then we speak on behalf of those symbols, bellowing out an anthem in the presence of roaring cheers. In America, the Lincoln Memorial is a shrine. It's a temple to man. Go look at what it says on the cornerstone. And the Statue of Liberty, the national image of freedom, to which countless patriots opine, it's the Greek goddess Athena, replete with her light and sunburst crown. Since it is our response to these pagan and political symbols which is at issue, we should not be surprised that there are two verbs in this brief statement. The first, chawa, was once again negated by lo. It was inscribed in the imperfect tense because Yahowah realized that we would make a habit of continually bowing down to, worshiping, and speaking on behalf of, showing homage to the images mankind has crafted. But more than this, chawa was engraved using the histophal stem, something that is so rare it is only found 170 times throughout the entirety of the Hebrew text. It is also known as the causative reflexive form. It reveals that the subject, which would be you and me, are influenced by the way we act with regard to this verb. Those who bow down in the presence of religious imagery, those who speak on behalf of political imagery, will find themselves prostrate before God in judgment. Those who worship will be associated with the object of their faith. Those who speak for and promote the gods and institutions man has created will be seen as being allied with them. The truth is, religion and politics change people, just as the military does, and in ways that displease Yahowah, disassociating those who fall prey to their beguiling nature from him. This stem and the conjugation tell us that the single most important thing to understand here is that making a habit of being patriotic, making a habit of being religious, making a habit of being political, making a habit of being militaristic, making a habit of swearing one's allegiance, paying homage to, or bowing down in this kind of an environment to human constructs is something that causes us to change. It influences us. Now, you can avoid this by simply stopping doing it, because it was written in the imperfect. The moment you refrain, then you are no longer guilty of violating the instruction. Now, the instruction wasn't set out as a command. There's no command. There's no imperative mood here. There are no laws in the Torah. This is simply an instruction. But you aren't in violation. You aren't opposed to the instruction the moment you cease being political or religious or patriotic. The moment you say, wait a minute, this is something that is counterproductive because it influences me, it changes me in ways that are not conducive to my relationship with God or to my salvation, I'm going to stop doing them. Then at that very moment, you are no longer in conflict with this instruction because it speaks in the imperfect of ongoing. and therefore its influence over you using the stem is no longer in play. The most obvious and indeed egregious violation of this divine instruction today is the example of Catholic and Orthodox Christians bowing down before and praying to one of the millions of statues of Mary, whom they believe is the Mother of God and the Queen of Heaven, albeit those titles are Babylonian, as is the religious festival named in her honor, Easter. So by using the low Yahowah law to say you should not ever bow down and worship, speak for or to, nor show any allegiance for what could only be construed as political and religious symbols, and by announcing that you should never promote their message because doing so will influence you, Yahowah has exposed his utter disdain for mankind's propensity to place its collective faith in that which is conceived and controlled by man. But he was not done. You see, the next verb is lo abad. You should not serve them. God's idea was liberating us, freeing us from servitude to human political and religious constructs. That's why he said that he freed us from being slaves in the crucible of Egypt. The crucible representing the crucibles of human religious and political oppression. He freed us from those things. The last thing he wants us to do is go back and be slaves to them. Lo abad, serving in servitude, living in servitude, being enslaved by them. Once again, Yahowah used the imperfect conjugation when he scribed abad, which speaks of habitual, ongoing behavior with unfolding consequences. But this time he used the hopeful stem. It is the passive counterpart of the hifel, which is to say, in this case, that religious imagery and political symbols influence an individual based upon how an individual acts towards them. So then here is an example of the hopeful. Satan compelled Paul to coerce billions of souls into worshiping him as God, convincing them that he died and was bodily resurrected, a la the pagan gods of old. So while the lost souls are participating in the action, they were beguiled into doing so. Abad, which is the Hebrew word for work, depicts the expenditure of energy, of considerable energy, or intensity towards a goal, which in the case is being religious or political. But more than that, abad speaks of service, which today we typically associate with the big three: a religious service, public and thus political service, and military service. And while I would argue that none of these equate to providing the service because the participants are paid and the work is counterproductive, I'd like to draw your attention to the military, where service is considered to be a sacrifice, both honorable and heroic, for which a debt of gratitude is expected. And yet, militaries are trained and equipped to kill. That is their job, and most are good at it. And while that is irrefutably true, there is something equally problematic with fighting, the conditioning that makes it possible. Indoctrinated by their superiors, a soldier's judgment is altered, and their conscience is seared. Even worse, the public is brainwashed into believing that their safety and their liberties are provided by these trained killers, their deadly institutions and their vicious weapons. And it's perverse. And lest I forget, man's economic systems, where most abad work, is applied. The next time you have a chance to look at your government's currencies, if you're an American, you will see the Eye of Osiris, the temple to Ra, and inscriptions promising a new world order written in the language of Rome, the nation which destroyed Yahowah's temple and tortured Yahusha. One more thought before we move on. Is there any difference between what Yahowah has written thus far and the initial requirements of the covenant, where we are asked to walk away from human schemes and to trust and rely exclusively on Yahowah. Hasn't God simply reinforced those requests with these statements? Think about that. The single most important thing for us to know are the terms and conditions of the covenant, so that we can respond and engage in it. The first of those is to walk away from our country, from Babel, from religion and politics. The second of those is to trust and rely upon Yahowah. Didn't the first of these statements tell us that God's name is Yahowah and that He is our Savior? That our existence, our continued existence, is directly related to forming an exclusive relationship with Him? And then didn't God say, I need you to disassociate yourself from religious and political imagery, from bowing down, for showing homage and respect to them, and for speaking on behalf of them and serving them? Has He not reinforced the first two statements of the covenant? And that the conditions of the covenant are the things that is most important to God? And He etched these instructions in stone so that we wouldn't mistake what He is asking of us, what He's encouraging from us. And in just a moment, He will also speak of the third requirement of the covenant, for us to walk to Him and become perfect, particularly in the sense of us not doing the other. Final segment of Shattering Myths. What I want to share with you at this point is what Yahowah said. The creator of the universe, the author of life, did not need to justify His position and to explain His overt opposition to us engaging on behalf of political, religious, militaristic, or economic schemes. He didn't have to do that, and yet He does. He is not required to reveal the consequence of such behavior. He can just say, this is what I have created. This is why I've created the universe. This is what I'm offering. If you would like to accept this, here are the terms and conditions. It's your choice. And He could have just left it at that. He doesn't have to explain Himself. He's God. He doesn't have to say, I get to make the rules because it's my family. He's God. He created everything. But He does. He's going to tell us now why He doesn't want us participating in religion and politics, why He doesn't want us to have divided loyalties. This is what He said next. It's so deep, so insightful, so uplifting, really, what God had to tell us in the second of three instructions on the first of these two tablets. And yet it's all missed when somebody truncates it, makes it a commandment as opposed to instruction, guidance. And they shorten it to, you shouldn't carve an image. For indeed, I, Yahowah, your God, am a zealous and jealous God. Kana El. A God who desires exclusivity in a relationship. A God who is emotionally passionate and extremely protective, zealous of those He loves. Counting and reckoning the perversity and sin of twisting and distorting of the fathers upon the children, concerning the third and fourth generations of those who genuinely hate and are hostile to me. God is interested in an exclusive relationship. If that is of interest to you, then you can't drag human competitors for God's attention, for His support, for His nurturing and uplifting ways along with you. God's telling you, I'm explaining, He's explaining why He is intolerant of us being religious and political. He's not saying that if you're religious and political that you're going to die a painful death and he's going to torture you in hell. Doesn't say that at all. He just says that if you are religious and political, then you're going to corrupt your own children, and I don't want to have a relationship with anyone who corrupts their own children. It's back to the statement I was talking about yesterday. Well, the family that goes to church and lives what we would in society consider a wonderful life versus the person who is a known purposeful liar, stealer, robber, and murderer. God is saying to us that the person who's religious is engaged in spiritual murder. They're engaged in all manner of deceit, stealing, treachery. And there's a consequence of that. And so God's saying, if that's what you want to do, just understand it isn't going to resonate with me because I want exclusivity. So you can choose to be part of the human family. You can choose to be patriotic. You can choose to be political. You can bow down to all of these things. Just understand that if you're doing that, you can't have a relationship with me. That's all there is to it. For indeed, emphasizing this point, I, Yahowah, your God, not I, Jesus, not I, Allah, not I, Obama. For indeed, I, Yahowah, your God, Kana El, am a zealous and jealous God, desirous of exclusivity in the relationship, emotionally passionate and extremely protective, counting and reckoning the perversity and sin of twisting and distorting, the depravity of perverting and manipulating, deviating from the way of the fathers upon their children. That's what happens. When we become patriotic, when we become political, when we become religious, our children follow in our footsteps. They don't follow in Yahushua's footsteps. They don't walk the walk that Yahowah not only talked, but he himself walked. They follow man. They're corrupted by man. They become perverse and twisted by man. And God's not going to have those who twist and pervert their own children in his home, nor the children who have been perverted and twisted in his home. They will not be his children. We'll be back with Shattering Myths tomorrow.